Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Talent Mobility 2024, the talent and tech that will move us. This webinar is brought to you by Weichert Workforce Mobility. And in this program, our panel of mobility and mobility tech experts are going to discuss and reveal some of the things that every corporate mobility manager needs to be prepared for this year. And of course, offer guidance to steer you through the tides of change. My name is Tim McCarney. I'm the VP of Marketing at Weichert, and I'm here to welcome each of you. We've just started up, but already we can see we've got over 100 people joining us. We've got some people from across the US, some from Canada, some from overseas. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and we trust that you will find the information that we share here today extremely valuable. Before we get things started, we just had a couple of things we wanted to cover. We used to refer to them as our housekeeping, which is why we have Gobi, our technology mascot, clutching a feather duster. But whether it's managing your mobility program or keeping things pristine, you can see Gobi is always there to help. But first things first, if you encounter any technical difficulties, please don't message us. There's not much we can do about it, unfortunately. Instead, please use the number listed here, which is the GoToWebinar helpline to get things straightened out. All attendees are on mute, which is kind of essential with an audience this size, but we do encourage your questions. You can use the chat feature on the GoToWebinar panel on your screen to submit questions. And while we may not get to all of them, our experts have agreed to respond to all questions that we don't have time for after the webinar. And we'll reach out to all of you who submit questions. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the stars of the show. The subject matter experts will be taking you through the top mobility trends. We have Jennifer Cannell with us today, our Vice President of Advisory Services, Sue Ahrens, our Regional Vice President, Joel Gonzalez, our Vice President, Chris Bernone, one of our Executive Vice Presidents, and Sean Norman, Regional Vice President. Sean is joining us from the UK today and wins the award for being most outside her typical business hours. So we appreciate it, Sean. Thank you so much for staying up a little bit later in the day with us.
Thank you.
We're not going to get into everyone's bios here. We want to get right to the program, so look them up on LinkedIn. Trust us, they've got the skills, and you can certainly look them up on LinkedIn. All right, now getting into our program. Before we leap forward, we want to take a quick look back. And one of the things that always bothered us about these trends webinars, the trends webinars that we would watch, were that they never really followed up on the trends that they presented, never really gave you a chance to see how these trends kind of panned out. So we wanted to spend a couple of minutes at the beginning recalling the topics that we put forth in our 2023 trends webinar. And Jen Cannell, our moderator today, I will turn things over to you by kind of asking your comments, as the VP of our advisory services and as Weichert's chief trends tracker, which of these trends came to light and which of these may have kind of fizzled out as the year progressed?
Sure, yeah, I think these were the 5 bigger trends that we really were looking at last year. I would say out of these ones, I think all of these were really trends that were quite on track, but I think the ones that I would really take a good look at again are, number one, remote and hybrid work. They are in fact happening. I think we are definitely going to be living forever in a world of hybrid work at a minimum. But the one thing that we really didn't quite take into full account is the return to office component, because that's really complicated the way that we're going to be looking at the overall workforce and how we're going to be managing it. It's just a different type of engagement, how we're going to get those folks back into the office, and how it's complicated the way we're going to be working moving forward. And then I think number 3, I think our ESG goals, I think we've seen companies that are, unfortunately, that we've seen that slip a little bit in the goals in that area, is companies being able to invest in that moving forward. We've seen some research showing that companies are investing a little bit less in that, and that's unfortunate. But however, in mobility, it's good to see that we've seen a lot of mobility managers have actually done some great things with their programs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, to put that into their programs in a way that we can support it. And it's certainly something that at Weichert we value very highly, and that we invest ourselves in. It's something that mobility can, as an industry, we can continue to support and move forward for our clients. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, no, look, we can comment on all 5 of these. You know, obviously there's just a huge focus on cost that continues to be, you know, both from transferee assignee level as well as inside companies, as we know. So that's going to be paramount. You know, commenting on the remote hybrid work, you know, what I see in, in my work and even working with clients, like you mentioned, in office is far from dead, right? I mean, it's in some statistics, it's anywhere from 10 to 50% of companies are using it pretty aggressively. Hybrid's about 30% based on the data, and remote can vary anywhere between, I don't know, 10 and like 36% was a number I saw recently. I know in one of our businesses, Jen, we have up to 40% of our folks remote. So it's here. This complexity is here to stay. With regard to ESG, one of the things, I recently heard from Jean Twenge. She just wrote a book called Generations, as it relates to wellness, which I think has really risen to the top of this issue. In 2006, she was looking at, adolescents and young adults from 12 to 17 and 18 to 25, and she said that in 2006, only about 8% of that population actually suffered from one bout of depression during the course of the year, and it's now in 2022 upwards of 20%. So that has implications, right, in terms of stress and the folks in mobility programs. So this whole wellness issue, I think, has really taken on a life of its own, even though the ESG thing has been a lot more complex. And then with AI, we're going to hear a lot from Joelle, but obviously everywhere roles are changing, skills are going to be needed, a lot of focus on tasks and so forth. So that's really kind of coming through the system, and I'll let Joelle speak to that a little bit more in depth.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I agree. I mean, there's a lot going on in the AI front. There's a lot of development, and it's almost every day there's something new happening with these large tech companies releasing new products, and we're excited because we're seeing the potential there to leverage the technology in a way that really catapults us into an area that was literally impossible in the past because of these large language models and the ability to analyze large sets of data. So we're really excited about that, and we can cover more about that down the presentation here.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're excited to have you on this webinar today, Joelle, because last year, I'll be honest, when we predicted, we made these predictions about AI being so critical and integral to what is going to happen in mobility. We really didn't know what we didn't know last year. But now this year, I think we have a little bit more clarity as to how it's going to be a part of how we're going to, it's going to be part of our daily in and out of mobility, and how we're going to start to see the future of mobility and how it's going to fuel what we do on a day-to-day basis, and just what it's going to look like, and the boundaries are just keep going. The walls just keep moving outward all the time. So
yeah, absolutely.
We're looking forward to hearing about it from you. So Tim, if you want to move to the next slide, we'll kick this off. We'll look at our first trend that we're going to discuss. Or actually, I think we're going to start with a poll, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. We haven't launched. Look at this. It's 2024. We're already doing our first poll. We do have a quick poll that we wanted to launch, and hopefully everyone up there can see the question. The question is, what changes do you plan to make to your mobility program in 2024? And the options you have: add or consolidate programs, any changes to benefits, delivering a better employee experience. It's all about the experience. We hear that every day, making sure that people are comfortable and settled and happy and productive in any roles. Are you going to be introducing any new tools or processes? And then, of course, is the omnipresent cost reduction initiatives. And you can select all that apply in your case. And while we're letting that run, Janet, are there any thoughts or any prognostication as to what we might see here?
Oh, I don't know. I would definitely, I would like to say that they are going to be making more changes to their mobility programs by adding or changing their programs. But I think companies are still going to be really looking at increasing or improving the employee experience. I think that they're not going to move away from that at all. I'll let anybody else chime in though. Sean, how about you?
From my side, a lot of it is around adding and consolidating programs, looking at policies, looking at better ways of doing things and reorganizing them to suit the current outlook with employee experience and cost both being key to clients. I covered 3 all in one go.
And here are the results right here.
There you go. So yeah, so employee experience came out on top. So I will say I'm a little bit surprised because I wanted it to be employee experience, but in the back of my mind, I kind of thought that cost reduction would be the top response, because that's everything that I'm hearing and seeing and reading is pointing to that cost constraint is going to be the headline for 2024. In fact, spoiler, it is going to be something that we're going to be discussing later on in this session. This is the theme of the overall session, and it's about technology and AI and how it is going to be really ruling how we're going to be and guiding how we're going to be moving through mobility for at least for this next year. I think it's going to be long after this next year. It's going to be creating efficiencies for all of us, and we're going to spend a little bit more time on this than the other trends because it is going to be so important to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and how we're going to be looking at our programs and how we're managing them. We've heard so much and we've talked so much about it recently, and companies really right now are at different stages of working with it and how they're even viewing it. Some of them are very, very still nervous about it, and they have different approaches to even how they want their employees to address it inside of the workplace. It can be intimidating because it's moving so fast and there's so much unknown about it. There's a lot of efficiencies that we broke it down here by stakeholder view. And we look at it here by the mobility managers, the leaders of the programs, the owners, if you will, the employees who use it, the RMC, the partners, and then the supplier partners. And lots of different ways that they can use it. But at the end, what are the benefits to them? You know, it's being able to provide some forecasting, budgeting. For employees themselves, we're looking at if it's going to benefit them, it has to increase their engagement levels. It has to be able to inform them and allow them to make better decisions. For the RMCs, it has to allow them to partner better with their clients and to provide better recommendations to them to enhance the processes, to remove redundancies. And then for supplier partners to provide them more alternatives and better costs. So in looking at that, Joelle, maybe I could start with you. Can you give us any examples of where we might be looking at reality today? Can you provide some examples of where we might see AI being used already in practice?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. I mean, we're seeing artificial intelligence becoming more common, in regular business process. For example, AI is used in business analysis of data to automate repetitive activities or tasks. It's improving customer service with chatbots. So these natural language chatbots can answer questions in a normal conversation, which is quite unique now. And we can, make better decisions using predictive analytics as an example. I know that financial institutions are using it to detect fraud detection, and that's great. And then, supply chain, for example, have been using it to forecast demand and optimize routes. So those are all really exciting ways to see this technology improve, different industries, and of course ours directly as well. And we can talk more about some examples there if you'd like.
Great. And Sue, if you could tell us a little bit, you speak with your clients all the time, and they're asking you questions about AI and how we're using it. What do companies, do you feel, what do they really want from technology? What are they asking you about?
Yeah, there's a point where I used to say, well, the technology is the table stakes, and it still is, right? You have to have the technology there. But our clients want the data, access to the data, but not just the data, the raw data. They want us to be able to create visualizations, to be able to, in a snapshot, communicate what's happening in a program or in a policy, whether that's the financial aspect of it, whether it's the process and the progress within each of these the moves or the policies, but it's how we analyze that data and how we bring that back to them. And that analysis is really critical. And it, requires us, that human component, to keep our analytical and critical thinking skills in check and tuned up all the time, so that we're looking for the things that really lend to identifying trends, being able to share predictions based on the data, sharing insights, right? What we're seeing, what it looks like for each client individually. Every client really is very unique in their own programs and their culture. And so those trends and insights, while they might be common across a couple of different companies or organizations, how they might apply that is entirely different. But the root of all of that is the data that sets us off in the direction with our clients.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And that's great. Because I think we're hearing more of those types of questions, and I think it's only going to become more increasingly important that when you said that they're table stakes, I think that's ubiquitous. I think we're just going to continue to hear that it's going to become the expectation for these types of capabilities. And then Chris, we hear a lot about and what kind of skills I think are. I would imagine that the skills that are going to be needed to really work with this kind of new environment of AI and technology, it's going to require a whole new mindset. And Tim, if you could bring up the center, we've listed here some types of skills or strengths that we're looking at: interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence, the ability to adapt, problem solving. I mean, these are all things that seem pretty common sense, but when you think of the ability to communicate effectively, engage meaningfully with others, fostering team cooperation, these are going to be more vital than ever if we're going to be working in a world that is going to be based on AI capabilities. As AI automates certain tasks, I think that empathy and understanding human emotions becomes even more valuable, I would think. And adaptability, certainly, because it is such a fast-moving technology. What are your thoughts on these? Which skills do you think are going to be needed in working in this new era of AI? And do you agree? Is there anything missing from here?
Yeah, no, we can talk about this in a lot of different ways, and certainly with all the transformation going on, we can talk even more deeply. But I heard Andrew Ng, who's formerly with the Google deep learning team, and look, we're going to be automating loads of tasks, as Joelle put it, and I think that's going to happen without question. So we got to get comfortable with the fact that it's here. And one of the quotes I know that I've seen in a couple of different places at IBM and HBR article, and even Andrew mentioned, was that AI is not going to take over jobs. It's the people that use AI will replace people who don't use it. And I think that's really important for all of us, not just in the mobility, anybody, that we're going to have to get reasonably comfortable with the proper use of it and what it will mean. And look, and we'll talk a little bit more deeply, I think, coming up, but just the fact that, as our jobs change and as things get integrated, we're going to need a set of skills that we may not have necessarily relied on or wanted to develop in the past, that are going to be requirements for being able to manage the complexities that we're experiencing. So yeah, no, you got a lot of them that I think people who are mobility managers who are successful are actually exemplars in. You've nailed most of them.
Great. And so Joelle, when it comes to AI, I think that companies, they're also very worried about AI, correct? They're very nervous about it. And every organization has, of course, their own security measures and protocols. I know there are a lot of companies that they outright tell their employees, we don't want you even going near AI or any of that. So what are some of the cautions that they should address to alleviate those concerns about the use of AI?
Yeah, look, it's definitely security is paramount when it comes to AI adoption. Organizations should guarantee that their AI systems adhere to data protection requirements like the GDPR, for example. They should invest in secure AI platforms with encryption and that have strong access controls, because you're right, it could be quite risky if you're not using those types of security measures in your systems. one of the things that we need to have in place, and this is for every company, is, an entire team overseeing the AI application. This should not be something that, that is taken lightly, because a data breach in this type of environment is very, very, risky, because the AI will be hacked and it could provide more information than previous systems could have done in the past. So that's something that's definitely very important to keep track of. But I do want to say that, I want to emphasize that AI is a tool for augmenting human capability, and we have to have a human in the loop mentality about these things. And so we should never give full, autonomy or the, the driving wheel to the AI systems. We should always have oversight and careful, controls over these systems to ensure that, that things remain safe and there is no risk to the individuals involved.
Thank you for that. That's very important. Okay, if we can move to the next slide and trend, we'll talk about something that is very, I think, near and dear to us, and that is the fact that as a result of the last few years, we've seen the mobility, global mobility, not only start to have a voice, a seat at the table with their leadership, but they've had a voice at the table. And we found that as a result of the last few years with everything moving so fast coming out of the pandemic, is that leadership was looking at global mobility to really help them to make decisions. They had to move people around the world very quickly. They had to move them out of countries into countries. They were looking at them as to how to manage and administer a remote workplace, but then they also then they had to bring them back into the workplace. So a few, looking at the right hand side here, once upon a time, I remember it was when you worked in mobility, it was all about domestic or international, and now it's domestic or global. But then you add on to that, well, business travel and compliance issues, commuters, immigration. And as of late, you can add on to that hybrid workforce, remote workforce, and now you can add on to that return to office, because leadership is looking at, they see global mobility as that link to engagement. How do we engage employees? How do we get them involved, and how do we keep those engagement levels up? And they know that global mobility knows how to put all those pieces together, and they probably reach out to more stakeholders within the organization than anybody. Puts a lot on the shoulders of global mobility. But what it has done is it's raised the visibility within the organizations, and it's certainly now they no longer just have that seat at the table, but again, they have that voice. So how do we keep them there? I'd like to start off by asking, let's see. Oh, and one thing we'd like to point out here is that a recent survey by the Canadian Employee Relocation Council, they asked mobility managers how they feel that that's been taking place. And what they did was they reported that majority of them have felt that they have somewhat slipped in the past year. Many of them feel that they're taking on more operational activities again. And in 2 years, they'd like to go back to being more strategic. So have they slipped in a little bit in that regard? Sean, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think it also links into what we were talking about earlier around getting more data. I think that's really helping mobility teams have that voice at the table, because they're able to give real proof of concept about their programs and what success that they are having there. So I think that's really making a difference, to be able to give the proof really quickly to senior leaders about the value that mobility is bringing. And so many of my clients have the stated aim in their organization that if somebody wants to get to the C-suite in their company or into the top leaders, they have to have an international assignment. And so you're talking to the senior leaders there who interact on a daily basis with the mobility team, and therefore listen to them when they've been through that experience themselves. So I do think that seat at the table is a voice, and is a voice that's getting louder and louder.
And Sue, how about you? What does it look like when mobility does have that voice, when they are able to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that when our mobility managers, the owners of mobility, are able to weigh in their own organizations, it really just makes them so incredibly valuable to the organization, regardless of what the organization's goals are. But to be able to come to the table knowing that you've been collaborating with a partner who brings all of the strategic components of a program or policy that you want to lay out and the trends, being able to share with that mobility manager the ability to say, here are some ideas, here's where I want to go. I was having a conversation with a client this morning about a transition or a potential transition to skills-based talent strategies versus hierarchical talent strategies, and what that means for them and what it would mean for example, extended business trips, what it would mean for maybe looking at interns in a different way or a leadership development program in a different way and bringing them in, looking at immigration differently, because if you are looking at skills-based, you may not be recruiting the same level or type of background that you were recruiting before. And so if you're open and collaborative about that, we can bring a lot of those different aspects as an RMC just to from the perspective of the services that we can support you with. But it makes the global mobility, the global mobility manager that much more valuable internally to support those talent strategies, among other strategies. Talent's just one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about you, Chris? I mean, going back to the earlier slide where we had the skills listed for learning and working with AI, this could be happening at a time when a company is going through a significant change themselves or transformation, which we're seeing so often these days, where companies have kind of had to right-size themselves. For example, they could be redefining the company's brand, the industry they're in. Everybody's in technology these days. They could be removing or adding their primary product or service, organizational restructuring. As companies are implementing AI or advancing the technological capabilities, which is, I think, a significant change themselves, plus another transformation. Is this different than other types of organizational transformations?
Well, I think in some respects, no. You know, when we've gone through like mainframes to minis to PCs, you know, to the internet to mobile, you know, as well as changes going on, you know, I don't know if it's different in that regard. You go through the whole change curve, you know, and the roller coaster of change, but you know, you go through the messiness and before you kind of come out the other end. But I think, you know, everybody's speaking to the fact that, yeah, it is different. And on the other hand is that, you know, there are multiple waves of change hitting the shores, to your point, at the same time. Right, you have AI, it's happening at a quick speed, very sophisticated. It's a lot more complex than we're used to. We got to get our arms around it in one way, shape, or form as a meaningful tool. Mobility, I mean, just look at your green panel on the right-hand side. You know, how much more complex and integrated it's becoming and what that's going to demand from us, you know, as professionals and leaders. We mentioned using data. I mean, data is the new gold. It's without question. And the influencing skills that we saw earlier, we're going to have to sell more effectively. We're going to have to build relationships and collaborate. And, you know, one of the folks I was talking to, you know, in the business was talking about that he had to make himself vulnerable to learn about other aspects of the business, you know, whether it be immigration or governance or tax or incentives and that kind of thing. So it is different in that there are multiple waves of change organizationally and individually. And I think that we have to be up for the task, you know, this remote issue, the skill gap issue, the discomfort that we're experiencing. I think it's at a higher magnitude of transformation.
I agree. If we want to go to the next slide and we'll talk about the next trend, because I think that's good. I think that's a good way to segue into I think it's something that we are all very good at here in mobility, is working, being very agile and working in unpredictable conditions. And that is this next trend. Disruptions in the global economy could spur more reluctance to relocate. We've seen a lot going on in the world lately. And I think that we're, you know, with geopolitical tensions, companies are continuing to navigate employee reluctance, while at the same time there's unrelenting pressure to increase immigration within across countries, while simultaneously being able to support those business needs. We've seen a higher priority on personal and physical safety of employees as they're traveling. Of course, there's lots of economic fluctuations. Michelle, I was wondering what you're seeing in your own region, because you're very close to a lot of these world events that are happening.
Yes, can you believe it's 2 years now since the Ukraine conflict started? And at that time, we were frantic helping our clients relocate people out of Ukraine into various different countries across Europe and the Middle East. A lot going into Dubai and into Germany, Poland, etc. So there was a real pressure then on temporary accommodation, on housing, that had quite a long knock-on effect over the last couple of years. But what we've seen really recently at the end of Q4 and into the beginning of this year is a slight sort of making that huge disruption more normal. And we've seen people now going back on home leave into Ukraine, so going on holiday, going back to reunite with their families or go for a vacation back there and then coming back out again. With Israel, we've seen people returning back to their assignments. We've had clients who've had their country manager moved off to Lebanon for when it first happened in October, but now back in country, working there again. So it seems that it's becoming much more normal now to expect a disruption and quicker to overcome it when this happens, because they just seem to come one after another.
Amazing. And of course, in that respect, Joelle, any thoughts on that regard, as far as, when these things happen, how we can be able to support this?
I think you're on mute, Joelle.
My apologies, I didn't realize that. So I was saying that we can definitely leverage AI in these scenarios. We can create definitely models to try to predict where there may be disruption in different markets, and create a strategy and a plan to support the solutions to those scenarios, and that helps us to mitigate any potential issues that we otherwise wouldn't be able to predict without AI. So I think that this is definitely something AI can help us with very directly.
Great. And Chris, from your perspective, I know that there's a lot of changes going on in the world, and how are you seeing people being able to manage this? This isn't like a whole nother level of stress, and you mentioned wellness earlier in our webinar, of being able to manage this kind of change as they're going through this type of pivotal moment through their own relocation and personal experience. As mobility managers are working with their employees and they're managing all of the external forces that are going on, are they going to be able to how are they able to manage the requests from their own businesses while managing the costs of the business themselves?
Yeah, well, I'm not 100% sure your question, but the reality of it is, yeah, we're going to have to create services to be able to support, people having issues and stress, and be very cognizant of the fact that, people are going to need additional ways they can be able to deal and cope with stressful situations. So, and it's just going to be one of those things. I mean, it was interesting, like I mentioned earlier, the data about, just even younger people with stress, and now with all of us as adults, I don't think it's any less complex. So we're going to have to look at this seriously as a business issue, not just as a human issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if we want to go to the next slide, the next trend, right? So unpredictable conditions. Again, this ties in with the last one. Won't keep companies from deploying talent globally. So again, we're going to see a lot of changes as a result. These things are going to continue. They're going to put more strain and stress on some of the supply chains that are going on. We're going to see cost of living is going to continue to be an issue around the world. Workforce stability challenges. This is really speaking to how we work as employees, how managers are going to support talent, and how companies are going to source their talent around the world. stresses on housing markets. This is everywhere. This is not just a, I think here in the US, we look at this as, this is just something here, but we're seeing legislation around housing markets impacting, it's certainly very much a North American thing, but in working with markets around the world, I think Sean would love to get your take on the housing market, what you're seeing over there. But we're seeing that there's global shortages everywhere, and it's very much in pockets. We've seen an uneven recovery from the pandemic over the past few years. It's really to the point where we're not even really talking about the pandemic anymore. It's a whole new world now with the remote workforce and how people are working. And then of course the work-life balances and work-life preferences are still going to continue to take a primary role in how people want to work, where they want to work, and how they're going to work. So would like to maybe, let's see, who can we ask about this one?
I'm happy to talk about the housing markets and some of the flexibility that's come into that.
We do often talk about how it is here. If you could reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah, so we saw with the pressure on the housing market that home searches became very different to what they'd traditionally been, and AI and technology came into a great success there with that helping us show properties virtually, because people needed to make a really quick decision because the property market was so hot. And therefore there wasn't time to go out and see 8 houses in one day and then go back the next day and choose one. You had to be told the perfect property's coming up for you now, look at it now, and you couldn't always get there. So sometimes it was a video or a look online to see what it is. We are seeing that stress on the housing market is easing off in my region across Europe now. Inflation is coming down a little bit, mortgage rates are coming down, there's more stock on the market, and people now are able to go out and have more choice in the property market. And that we're seeing across the region, into the Middle East as well. So there are some signs of recovery there, but it did go through a really unpredictable time when property was just going crazy.
Great, thank you. And Chris, you know, when it comes to lifestyle preferences, individuals, they might have a strong attachment to their current lifestyle, including factors, like climates and where they want to live, cultural, recreational opportunities, or community atmospheres. I know that relocating to a different region means, of course, adjusting to new and an unfamiliar lifestyle. I kind of referenced this a few minutes ago. How do you see this playing out nowadays as companies are balancing remote and hybrid workforces, their return to office initiatives, and they still need to mobilize talent? Do you see a need for companies to prioritize perhaps a customized approach to ensure consistency to the company's culture and expectations for the experience?
Yeah, look, I think the most practical way to look at this is the reality of it, right? There's the organization need to be consistent, and I think that has to be on the table, as well as customizing based on situations, obviously the policies, the culture, the level of talent, the value, the potential. So I think it's a both and, Jen. I think companies need to look at, folks with consistency, as well as, customizing, to meet the needs of folks that they want to retain and that are of value.
Okay, great. Well, let's go on to the next trend, because I think this is where we're going to talk a little bit about how companies are going to be able to look at technology through a new lens and how they're going to be able to manage these forces, these things that are going to challenge them in the next year. And that's really, the companies are going to be striving to balance care and cost. And what we are going to see companies, we're already starting to hear about the fact that they are looking a little bit more closely at their budgets. But over the past few years, I feel that companies have done right by their employees. They've really focused on the employee experience because they've had to. They had to really enhance their programs in a lot of ways in order to bring in the best and most critical talent. And I think moving forward, they're going to be they're not going to compromise on that. They found a way to provide a great employee experience. And despite the fact that it's going to be cost pressures, they're going to be unrelenting about of giving that up. So how can they do that? Sue, what are some of the methods do you think of being able to reduce costs if they're not going to be able to? I think the number one way that they reduce costs, right, is they either cut benefits, you reduce volume. What are the other ways? You reduce volume, or you reduce benefits. What are the other ways, though, that they might be looking at reducing costs while still ensuring that the employee is taken care of?
Yep. And I think that, those are pretty typical, what you've identified is cutting or reducing benefits. But an area where, and I think we'll talk about this maybe in the next trend too, but the flexibility, right? Where you're able to meet employees where they are and provide the benefits they really need versus just providing a blanket. So yes, I'm sort of alluding to the core flex approach to mobility, in that you know that you're providing services that are necessary versus going out with a blanket. Everybody gets exactly the same. I think that trend, or that pendulum, really is swinging more towards, let me take care of this person, this family, and do it in a cost-effective way. So things like virtual tours, things like making sure that employees have access, and when they hit the ground, they're ready to go. We're making good use of the time that we're in region or on look-see trips and home-finding trips. These are things that, from the standpoint of how do we become more cost-effective from a corporation standpoint. But on the flip side of it, you want to be able to rely on a reload management company to say, how are you managing those costs internally? How are you looking at the supply chain, and where are you integrating vertically, or making sure that all of the data components are in line, so that when we're getting your employee, we've got your employee for a limited period of time, and we might be talking to them, are we making the best, most effective use of their time? And so some of these costs aren't as tangible as cutting benefits, or some of these cost efficiencies aren't as tangible as cutting benefits or reducing the number of services, or providing in each region different sets of services. But it's really about being efficient and delivering an efficient service, so that the user is really feeling as though their time is valued and they're getting things done when it's time for them to get things done.
Yep. That's critical. And you can see on here on the slide, we've listed some of these areas where we're going to see some of these cost increases, where immigration fees alone are going to be rising 3 to 5%. And that's just to cover the costs to maintain efficient services, enhance security measures. I learned recently that in the U.S., effective in April, which is coming up very quickly, H-1B visa, H-1B petition fees will rise almost twofold, or more than that. It'll be a 70% increase. And we're going to see fees like that increase over the next year all around the world for certain immigration fees. Home purchase with interest rates over 6%. That's not historically high, but it's going to seem high for employees who are first-time home buyers, or second-time home buyers, I should say. If for those of us who have enjoyed 3% rates, if they're moving again, that's going to be a significant increase to them. Household goods, on average, the increased costs is going to be increasing due to some of the geopolitical events that have taken place quite a bit. And they're going to be looking for lower prices, but in order to provide that, suppliers need to be able to streamline their service offerings and perhaps look at other suppliers, and they'll be looking at alternatives to some of the options that they've had, not necessarily at other suppliers, but it might be other types of household goods shipments and things that they've done previously. And then more accompanied moves. We're going to see more accompanied moves happening. Families are wanting to stay together, and a lot of people are choosing to move to where their families are located. And those family needs are certainly going to increase costs. We've seen that be having a large impact on the way people are moving as well as the way they're working. And Chris, I'd like to ask you, you work directly with leaders of our own organization, our clients' organizations, and throughout your career, you've researched, you've authored books, you've led others in managing change and creating a culture of success. And I anticipate with the pressure to trim costs, it will begin with, as I mentioned earlier, a few mobility benefits, but a few years from now, companies will find that they could lose up to 30% of their workforce by trimming a few benefits. Things that they might think are okay to trim now, they might make a big difference. It's not always a direct correlation, but for mobility managers, they know how to make that connection. Something as simple as losing spouse and career assistance, knowing how important dual careers are to families nowadays, that dual income is, it could make a huge difference in a few years to getting the right talent in the door. So can mobility leaders make the case now to prevent the erosion of their programs that they've worked so hard to build up over the past few years?
Yeah, well, I think both you and Sue, you talked about, efficiencies, right? I think that's where the efficiencies have to start. You got to show that you're doing something internally to make yourself better, faster, cleaner, and so forth. So you can do that. And that's where I think the tools came up. I think it was second on your list of where the attention was. So that's where those tools come in, and potentially AI, right, that Joel's alluding to. But look, we talked about voice earlier, and if you want a voice, you have to have something to say. So now's the opportunity to do it. I don't think it's waiting any longer. We have to be much, much better at leveraging data, gaining insights, telling stories, quantifying the data so that we can speak on a business level and a financial level. We have to align with talent. We have to build relationships and collaborate in new and different ways. We have to be open to actually driving the change, because oftentimes people are not going to do that. And if we have the courage to drive the change and influence, we're going to have to get skilled at knowing our business, knowing our data, knowing how the financial impact is, knowing what the opportunity costs are. And we have to become marketers and salespeople and influencers and communicators at a much, much higher level. We have to be vulnerable, like I mentioned before. We have to learn other aspects of the business at a much quicker rate than ever before, so that we can, have both empathy and tell our story in a meaningful and impactful way.
Yeah. And speaking of telling the story, oh, sorry, go right ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that, Jen, that I think some of the things, these competing dynamics that we're seeing, Chris, are, employees might be receiving recruiting calls, and it's easy to go outside your organization, but it's so much more cost effective for us to retain talent than it is to go and recruit new talent.
Right.
Trying to find those areas of whether it's horizontal talent development, going into a new area within an organization, but giving your talent, giving your resources and your assets a reason to stay is a really important thing. And so whether that's the employee experience, the user interface, whatever it might be, we all know that it's more cost effective to keep those employees. And so the things that we can do that make it easier for them to choose us as employers over and over, I think is a really interesting way to look at, how we manage our talent.
Yeah. And how we articulate making our case. We have.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And Joelle, I mean, can you add to that as far as, tying this together, is how can AI and how can that support comparing costs?
Yeah, I think companies can, leverage AI to deliver a compassionate relocation package and control costs by creating customized policies and ensuring that, for example, the employee choice programs that we're, very passionate about, those kinds of programs are great for that, because they allow us to, using AI, create a package that has been built on predictive analytics, built on patterns that the AI has proven to find through the very vast, databases that we have on all of these relocations, and allows us to really deliver a very customized package that, ensures that the employees are getting the services they need and not leaving, services on the table they may never need or touch. And so that's one way definitely that we want to, consider making the experience better for sure. Another one for sure is, predictive analytics. Again, I say it a lot, but it's really the bread and butter of AI, right? Is the ability to analyze data and predict trends in the employee relocation, and then helping to anticipate and manage the costs more effectively through that predictive analytics capability. And then lastly, program adaptability, right? AI can assist in developing flexible, choice programs that adjust in real time feedback, right? So we can see that, for the last quarter, this particular policy provision has been largely ignored, but this other one has been very frequently on the #1 list of exceptions. So let's pivot. Let's give the companies that intel and work with them to make better decisions about the next quarter, right? And really create a more dynamic, a more, relocation-friendly, employee-friendly experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I love that. I really like and appreciate the aspect of the predictive analytics and AI, where in the flexible programs that we're going to be able to, in the next era of this technology, is being able to use it to help make more informed choices by looking at that data and saying, okay, what were those choices that they made that were the most meaningful to help companies to identify what are the new benefits that would also help the next generation of mobile employees move or entice them to take the relocation, overcome reluctance, or perhaps what will make it facilitate the move, whatever that objective is. That's great.
And Jen, I would also add that, I'm often asked this question because I'm always reading about AI and ways to implement it, both the promises and perils of AI. And one of the things that I often hear is, will I lose my job? Will AI replace me? And, Chris alluded to this earlier. When you have to keep in mind that there's actually a grassroots movement right now, but a lot by YouTube, by Facebook, Meta now, even Microsoft, a lot of them are, putting in policies that ensure that the consumer of the technology is aware that the technology that they're interacting with is not human, that this is a computer generated voice or computer generated or AI generated video. And what's starting to happen is that we're starting to learn that people are turning off on those. They're like, I don't want to listen to an AI bot. I don't want to listen or watch this generic video. And the humanity of it is coming out. And I'm a firm believer in really the promise that over time, we're going to become more human because of AI, not less human. I think humanity will survive and will prevail over these, uncertain times. I think that our humanity is really where it counts. And there's nothing more special for me than coming to the office and putting my eyes on my colleagues and being able to talk with them in person. That's to me is really important. And AI is no different. I think people will learn that it's a tool. It's here to augment you. It's your personal assistant, but it's never more than that. And I think that that's important to understand and keep in mind as we go further into this new technology world.
Well, everybody heard it right here from Joel himself. He's our innovation vice president and the person behind AI. He said it right there that it's even with AI, we're going to become more human. You cannot replace humans with AI. Yeah. All right. In light of time, we're going to advance to the next slide. We have two more. I'll breeze through this one rather quickly because I don't think this is going to be a shocker to anybody. But companies will be offering more program options to support mobile talent, even though they're going to be looking at reducing costs. As I mentioned earlier, there's more on their plates. That means it's going to be more on more types of mobility, and they're going to be looking for more options. Businesses are going to be looking for global mobility to be more creative as they have more responsibilities under the mobility umbrella. 81% of HR leaders, they need to get hyper-personalized to ensure benefits attract and retain talent. That means they're going to be looking for more options. So they're going to be, in this, we're going to see an increase in the number of program types. Nearly half of companies, according to an AirInc recent survey, said that they're going to be using multiple policies to provide flexibility to the business. And the average number of policies in a company's suite continues to climb. Just a few years ago, the average was 3, and now we're up to 5 or 6. And the creation of light assignment options has also shown to increase that number. So we're going to see that companies need to continue to drive the direction of our innovation and it's going to result in enhancements to things like flexible programs, permanent transfer policies, business travel. It's also going to drive the innovation in technology and how they want to utilize flexible programs. So I think that's the gist of how we're going to be looking at these broader program types. With that, why don't we just go jump to the last trend here, so that we can get everybody to kind of weigh in on this one. And that's the fact that the top employers, those employers of choice, they're going to be investing in their employees. Relocation and mobility, these are still going to be the change makers for top employers. These are the employees that companies identify as the ones that they're going to be the highest investment for employers. And in looking at them, we've seen recently that employers are looking at those hand raisers. The employees that raise their hand, they volunteer for moves. And the majority of companies who support those employee-initiated moves are the ones that are looking at them as the future talent of their organizations. And with many employers still citing struggles to find certain types of talent within their organizations, they're wanting to hold on to the talent that they already have. So they might not be looking externally for talent as often as they used to in the past couple of years, but they're going to be very reluctant to lay off any more workers right now after making drastic cuts. So they're going to be looking at the year ahead. They're going to be looking at holding on to the talent that they already do have. So anybody who raises their hand and says, hey, I'd like to continue to work for the company, but in another location that you already have, they might try to find them an opportunity in that location and see how they can do that. That may be an area where with this hybrid work role may help to facilitate that. They can relocate them, they can find them that opportunity. They know this is an engaged employee. Just by them raising their hand and asking for this opportunity, they know they want to stay with the company. We looked at this. We recently conducted a survey in this last month on this very topic. We found that the number one reason that these hand raisers want to move is to be with their families. This is certainly a outcome of the last few years of what they've been dealing with. They're finally saying yes, as a result of what we've been going through the last few years of burnout. Being together in the pandemic apparently didn't scare away everybody from being with their families, all that closeness. But they've said, we know what matters the most to us. They want to be with their families. Some of them said that they wanted to stay. They either had to follow their spouse or partner because of their career, or they're actually going to be with their family in another location. And because of that, they're asking their employers to support them in that endeavor. So that blending of work and life is starting to come together, and they're not afraid to go to their employers and ask them for it. So Chris, to become one of these employers of choice says a lot about an organization and its values. And what does this mean when a company is willing to say that they're willing to find or even create an opportunity for an employee in another location because they've raised their hand and volunteered?
Yeah, well, look, there are a lot of things. I mean, briefly, look, my role is in talent. I'm a big fan of keeping people who are extremely valuable and want to stay with the company and have special gifts and have potential. So I think it does say a lot. And as we begin to get more integrated with talent, and understand how to meet, people where they are and employees where they are. Yeah, I think it's a big issue. I think it'll be a big plus, and I think it'll help, advance employee of choice in a very big way. But certainly it's got to be done on a case-by-case basis. If this individual has potential, is determined, offers great insight, wants to learn, wants to grow, is engaged, these are kind of characteristics of people that we want to be able to, keep in the company. So I think it says a lot about it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Jen,
well,
can I just add, Jen, I just think it's complete. We didn't talk about this before, but in just this conversation, it's made me think about one of my tech clients that one of the things that they talk about, a culture that they're trying to build, is one company, multiple careers. So they're actually building a culture whereby their employees are encouraged to raise their hand and say, let me go take on another angle or another aspect in this organization and have more than one career at that company. So I think that's a little indication of some of what's being done.
That's a great example, Sue.
I'm sorry, Chris?
No, that's a great example, Sue, of kind of, reframing this new world that we're living in and accepting that as an organization, that it's actually a benefit to the company.
And I know we're up on our time, but I was given the go-ahead to go over for 5 minutes, so I understand if people want to leave. But we are recording this session so we can keep going if we want to. And Sean, I was wondering if you could just weigh in a little bit on the family aspect and how important this is to employees nowadays, because I know that you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, we're seeing something really interesting in our region, in that when we looked at our top destinations for the last quarter, jumping up into our top 5 at number 3 and number 4 were Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and they'd been in the top 10 but towards the bottom of there. But what we're seeing is families moving in, if there's a job in Saudi, is looking at the family where they're going to be best situated. So it might not be living in Saudi is right for the family if both spouses want to work, because it's hard to get a visa for the trailing spouse going in there. So we're seeing companies being really flexible about the support they're giving to the families, giving them choice about where they live. Maybe they commute into Saudi, or maybe they like the living in the compounds there, and that will suit them as a family. But making sure it's right for those individuals, because you don't want a failed assignment for the costs into Saudi. You have to pay for your housing for a whole year up front, so you want to make sure it's the right decision. But the volume of work that we're doing into the Middle East right now is phenomenal.
Oh, great. So thank you very much. So I think we're gonna end there. I think with that, you can see there's so many things that are going on. There's so many changes to mobility, the activity that's happening around the world. It's not so easy to just make changes to your program without it having cascading impact on other areas. So I think that any changes that the company is going to be making over the next year, it's not as simple as let's just reduce benefits. Let's look at streamlining here or adding to that, because you can't simply reverse it and have a direct correlation. So I would encourage everybody to really think about what those changes are and do an impact analysis and bring in those stakeholders to talk it through. I'll hand this back over to Tim to close us out, and thank you for everybody for staying on a couple extra minutes.
Thank you. I get to be the opening act and the closing act here, which is actually pretty cool. We did, as questions, if you have any questions, you can send them in. Our subject matter experts did agree to respond to them, so they can respond to you directly. If you have anything, we just want to be respectful of the time as we are right up against it. One quick thing I'd like to add, I would be remiss as the marketing guy to not encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. If you love information like this, you want to stay abreast of our upcoming webinars and other learning events, please subscribe. You can use that handy scan code right there on your screen, or you can visit our website, WeichertWorkforceMobility.com, and on our blog and homepage, you'll find a link to subscribe to the newsletter, and we hope you'll find it informative. Last thing we wanted to mention, we've got a ton of great content on our website. Again, you've heard from these subject matter experts, the great information that they impart, information you can put, actionable data you can use every day in managing your mobility program. These are just some of the examples of the white papers you can download from our website. Again, that's WeichertWorkforceMobility.com. And with that, I would just like to thank our SMEs, Jen, Sue, Sean, Joelle, and Chris, for sharing their wisdom. And I want to thank our audience. Those of you, the hardcore Relo fans, was still there after an hour, for taking time out of your day to learn with us. As I mentioned, please be sure to follow us on social media to get updates on our next webinar. And until then, we hope you have a great day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.